all permutations of the notion that like all Democrats need to do is like be more moderate. And the reason people are pissed off with them is because, they had pronouns like that,
Right.
that whole story, or they
Yeah.
gave a shit about immigrants as if they actually did.
Latinx lost the election.
Yeah,
That's it.
Latinx, which like nobody even tried using, is like what happened, right? So the pundits would tell us that voters are judging people on an axis of woke to moderate.
Hmm. Mm-mm.
Absurd. Not true.
Hello, friends, and thank you for joining us on Charting the Way Forward, where we deliver research-informed strategy and intelligence from across the Democratic coalition. This podcast is produced by Way to Win, where we aim to upend politics as usual. I'm your host, Kerry Eleveld, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, friend of the pod, political strategist, messaging aficionado, and principal at ASO Communications, Anat Shenker-Osorio. Welcome, Anat.
Thank you, Carrie.
So, I have had the pleasure of listening with great interest to Anat's insights on multiple other pods over the years, including her own, Words to Win By. So, and you can catch her there. You guys did you recently have a new season out? Is that true or is that?
We had a new season last year.
Okay.
It's a narrative podcast, and so every episode profiles a campaign we won somewhere in the world, so it takes a while to produce because there's lots going on each episode.
Yeah, I could tell that as a journalist at heart, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of production in this podcast here. So it's not quite like us. We turn on record and just do our best.
There's a place for everything.
Right, right, exactly. So, one note for our listeners, we are actually recording this podcast nearly a week before it airs. And, right at this moment, Senate Democrats, this is like going to be old news by the time you hear it, but Senate Democrats at this very moment have just helped Republicans advance a measure that will give Donald Trump a measure to fund the government that will give Donald Trump and Elon Musk, sweeping powers to dismantle the government, unilaterally withhold federal funding that has already been appropriated by Congress, and really just decimate funding for the District of Columbia. And so this is going to go through based on what just happened. And as long as we're starting this out without getting into the technicalities of who voted for what and whatever, I just have to ask you, Anat, what this tells you about the moment we are in as a country.
So I hope that this is a clarion call to finally internalize and accept something I think many of us have known, at least somewhat, for a long time, but we've refused to accept, which is that we can't vote our way to democracy. That theory of change was disproven when we won in 2018, we won in 2020. We did much, much better than expected and staved off much of the famed red wave in 2022. The strategy wherein we confront fascism by electing Democrats doesn't work. And I think that a lot of us have persisted inside of that strategy for a very long time for reasons that are, you know, uh, justifiable. It's not the most lunatic strategy ever within a country in a context such as our own. But I think that what it has done for a very long time is even as, and it's a little bit ironic, we lambast many of the Democrats, hashtag not all Democrats, I'm aware, but we lambast the Democrats who are not actually standing up for us and with us in this moment. And we're saying, can't you see what MAGA is? Can't you see what this regime is? Can't you see what's going on? You're not confronting it in the way that you need to, not recognizing that we're also performing a permutation of the same mistake in thinking that we're going to get Democrats to do something about this. So imagine if, when folks were confronting segregation in Montgomery and being denied sort of the most basic fundamental equality to be able to sit where you need to sit, or in the midst of the devastation of the newly emerging plague of HIV/AIDS, and people are dying en masse, and what is going on? If either of those groups of people, and I can give you other examples, had scratched their heads and said, you know what I think we should do? I think we should ask the Democrats. I think we should vote for Democrats, and I think we should lobby them, and I think we should like pressure them and call them to do something about this. That would have been a ludicrous thing to do because they knew that that was never going to work. And so, what did they do instead? What they did instead, it turns out, is the only thing that actually works in the face of autocracy, which is to understand that a sustained, engaged, relentlessly resisting force of only 3.5% of the population has any and every time that has been constructed and sustained has been what has toppled autocracy. So back to your question, which I didn't forget, what this
Hey,
moment
listen,
tells,
I'm with you here. I am like going along for the ride.
that's
So,
good. It's
yeah.
it's not a short ride
Yeah.
on a integrated bus, a
It's a
long
it's a good
ride on an integrated
and
bus.
everyone gets to sit down
Everyone gets to sit down. If there's
until
enough
they have to
seats.
stand up.
Until they have to stand up. That's exactly right. So I think that this we're going to vote our way to democracy concept. First of all, the recognition that we actually don't have a democracy and arguably never have for many, many, many reasons. Let's just start with, the Electoral College, the Senate, gerrymandering. You and I could trade examples. And then the decimation of the Voting Rights Act, sort of all the ways that trying to get people to not be able to vote, et cetera. So this idea that Democrats, many of whom, I'm sorry to say, but most of whom came into power on the basis of raising extraordinary amounts of money and have been successful capitulating to a system wherein they are also beholden to their billionaire backers. The notion that those people would act any differently when their behavior has been, for them as individuals, extraordinarily successful. Chuck Schumer has made Chuck Schumer the leader of the Democrats in the upper chamber of Congress. Inside of his own life, he is extraordinarily successful. Why would he break pattern and do something other than the things that have led him to what I assume to be what he wanted to do with his life? And so I guess what I hope, and it's a week later, listeners, what I hope is that we recognize that we actually need to understand the problem that we are facing, and we need to stop trying to use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail.
So, does that leave you at basically a big movement of direct action sweeping the country? I mean, is there an alternative to that, or is that what you're envisioning?
What I'm envisioning is resistance, refusal, and ridicule. Those are the three R's that have been integral to toppling autocracy within every context that I've either worked on or have intimate knowledge of. So I'm talking about Slovenia. I'm talking about Poland. I'm talking about the recent defeat of Le Pen in France. I'm talking about taking down Bolsonaro and electing Lula. I'm talking about US civil rights. I'm talking about ACT UP. It has taken confronting the actual powers who are, generally speaking, and certainly in the US context right now, actually not the politicians, they're the oligarchs. It's the billionaires that are backing them that actually have the power and need to be the ones that are confronted.
So, you're not just talking about directed at Congress. You're talking about anywhere, at all
My
people. If you can,
my
yeah.
my
Interesting.
2025 mantra is Mangione without murder.
Okay. We appreciate the last part of that, that without murder.
I would like to thoroughly be on record as saying without murder. We don't need to be murdering. But imagine, if you will, on the heels of that United Healthcare CEO being murdered, which I do not condone, I'm repeating again,
Yes.
there had been a series of paintball strikes of other healthcare CEOs without hurting them, certainly without doing any kind of, long lasting damage to them. Just that one action alone, as you saw, I don't remember what the healthcare company was that had like declared they were no longer going to pay for all of sedation. Like,
Mhm.
they were going to give you discount anesthesia. You can have like half an anesthesia if you can't pay for it. They reversed that policy. United Healthcare, where that CEO was working, they changed how they do denials of claims. A bunch of other healthcare corporations changed how they consider claims just on the basis of that one sort of very, very obviously, heightened incident. We actually have to do things like ACT UP was doing, breaking into the New York Stock Exchange and hanging a banner from the balcony where they ring the bell for trading every morning that said sell Burroughs Welcome. Burroughs Welcome being the company that manufactured AZT. And then when they were swiftly arrested, doing a die-in out in front. We actually have to be putting into people's faces, whether that be through boycotts, whether that be through my fantasy of a general strike, through music, through art, through things like getting dairy farmers. I'm working on this right now. I happen to be from Wisconsin to paint on the sides of their barns. I'm fighting fascism.
Okay.
I do not agree.
All right. I like these. I tell you, the paint thing, the paintball thing, or is that what it is, the paintball that you're suggesting? That worries me a little bit because it feels like intimidation. It feels like, people would feel like, oh my gosh, they're really targeting. I mean, they're using paintballs right now. I mean, but they could come back with something worse. I don't know. But, but your point overall, so you can come back at me on that. The point overall, I totally agree with, which is let's get creative. Let's choose, multiple places and people to sort of direct our energy to, and not just Congress, but everywhere. And some of the, like, I wrote a book about the marriage equality movement between 2005 and 2015, right? And during the reporting of that book, learned so much about the creative activism during the AIDS crisis and the, silence equals death movement of the of that time. And so that was ACT UP, right? And
Can I? Sorry.
yeah, please go ahead.
I'm just so excited. So I just yesterday was in a meeting with folks, OG ACT UP, OG ACT
OG.
UP,
Hmm.
like originators,
Yep.
and they are now on a campaign because they have been working on an obscure thing that probably most people haven't heard of called PEPFAR, which is part of USAID. PEPFAR is one of the most extraordinarily effective things that the United States has ever done for the world, which is a comprehensive, extraordinarily cheap program to control, prevent, treat HIV/AIDS. So it is the distribution of condoms, it is the distribution of PrEP, it is, education, comprehensive sex ed in much of the world, a lot of it concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. And it has been extraordinarily successful. PEPFAR, when USAID was decimated, when they stole our money, when Elon Musk and his ilk, the Broligarchs, stole our money in order to advance the hostile takeover of our government, this is all messaging I use very deliberately,
Hmm.
they decided to slash PEPFAR. And not only did they slash it, if you want to fully like have your blood boil, there are offices across sub-Saharan Africa that are full of supplies that have already been paid for. Already been paid for. That
Yeah,
money,
it's just
it's not
sitting
just
there.
appropriated, it was spent.
It was spent.
And they're not allowing local people to access those objects. They are hiding away Ebola vaccines. There's already a boy who died, and it goes bad after very little time. That's just going to go into the garbage. Nobody is saving anything, to be clear. Not that that would have been justified. But I mean, this is just beyond, it's not even petty, it's just
Sure.
intentional cruelty. So
Yeah.
these ACT UP folks
It's
who
intentional
work,
murder is what it is. I
and
mean,
in fact,
yeah.
part of going back half a step before we go into lauding, the ACT UP folks again, which I will never tire of,
Yeah.
uh, what should have happened with this fight in the Senate and, in the Congress is that they should have had a clear, repeated refrain. I was saying this at the time, I've been yelling and screaming it. It's a MAGA murder budget. That is what it is. It is the MAGA murder budget. Every time Democrats called it the continuing resolution, and are we going to vote on the continuing resolution? And will there be a continuing resolution? This is a MAGA murder budget. This is by the bullies for the billionaires, money that they want to take from us to abduct our neighbors, steal medicine from our parents, take food from our children, and destroy our government. Had Democrats actually said, this is the MAGA murder budget, it would have been much simpler to explain, I'm a no on the MAGA murder budget. I
Right.
cannot vote yes on the MAGA murder budget. I will be a no on the MAGA murder budget. And even though I'm not so incredulous as to believe that the media would actually report it that way, had that been what Democrats voiced in their voting, the media at a minimum would have had to say, Democrats keep repeating over and over again that this is the MAGA murder budget. And perhaps it would have forced Republicans into the rhetorical position that Democrats often find themselves, which is negation, saying, this is not a murder budget. How dare the Democrats call this a murder budget? Why are they saying it's a MAGA murder budget? Thereby actually repeating the refrain. So coming back to ACT UP, what the folks who are fighting for PEPFAR have been doing is targeting a little known dude. His surname is Morocco. He was kicked out of 5 different positions in the first Trumpocene, fired 5 times from the Trump administration. But then he was a January 6th rioter. And that landed him the sweet, sweet gig of being the administrator of what is left of USAID. So he is presently in charge of USAID, a job he landed, again, to repeat, by having fucked up 5 times and then been a rioter. And that is what, qualified him. And so what they've been doing, because this man does not like publicity, this man does not like protest,
Yeah.
everything he's been doing has been behind closed doors. So they've been going to all of his meetings and pounding on the door from outside and slipping their signs underneath. And so when I talked to them yesterday, we
Gotta
were
love it,
talking.
man. You gotta love it. The creativity. We're gonna get off of this in a few minutes, but it's so enjoyable. It's so enjoyable. So we're not, but like the creativity, the collective creativity of what you can do when you figure out someone's weak spot, right? And then you just just grind into it. Just get that like, to go. So go ahead. Sorry. So
No,
they've
it's
been,
fine.
yeah.
So the reason I went off into this cul-de-sac is silence equals death. So we were talking about messaging, and the person who came up with silence equals death is still alive. And I told them the obvious choice for them, because people don't remember, it was a two-part slogan. Silence equals death, action equals life.
Mm.
It had a second component that got
Good on
sort of
you.
used less.
Yep.
So stealing equals death because they are stealing our money with the same font, the same black and white. So it calls back to generations of yore and to this extraordinarily courageous, effective, direct resistance. And then USAID equals life, education equals life, clean air and water equals life, healthcare equals life. We have to actually seize the moral high ground and make it clear what the stakes are and which side we're on.
Right. Okay. I'm going to make 2 quick points, which may or may not be quick. I mean, one of them is, and I will just say this, I think getting to this place that you're talking about, which I endorse, right? I endorse this creativity. is a question of how desperate Americans get, because the ACT UP folks, these incredibly brave activists who were fighting with everything they had at a time when the government was ignoring them and ignoring a plague that, I think mowed down around 25,000 people before Ronald Reagan ever even mentioned it as president. Um, they were desperate. There was they had concluded everyone's going to ignore us while we die off, and there's no other choice. There's no other avenue. We can't depend on the government. We can't, a lot of cases our loved ones are ignoring us, blah blah blah. We have like there's no other option, right? So I don't want the country to get to that desperation point, but on the other hand, I don't want to get there too late either, right? I want Americans to conclude that they don't have a choice but to get active before it gets to a total desperation moment, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is one of the things I learned from covering some of those, from going back and talking to some of those original ACT UP members who had taken part in some big actions, was that right when they thought they had crossed the line, they had really made an inroads. That's when so like I'll just take one example. Anyone wants to look this up, it was a great action. They did a die-in at St. Patrick's Cathedral, I think in New York. And it was, during a service inside the cathedral, and they like they had separate groups of people all ready to do different things. They didn't even tell each other what they were going to do in case one of them got found out. Then you wouldn't be able to stop the whole action because the other groups would still do their part of the action, right? And so it went haywire, out of control. At one point, some guy stood up and said, they're killing us, or something like that. This isn't perfect, but this is close. And everybody started doing their actions that they had predetermined, and they got carried out by the police and whatever, and it was a huge deal that they had done this in a middle of a Catholic service. And the people who were there and were part of the action, like the New York Times condemned the action, okay? And the people who were there who were part of the action thought, oh my God, we have gone too far. Like we've lost the New York Times, we've lost, we've lost. And then one of them got a report back from their, like I think mom or aunt in Connecticut, who reported back that she had been talking to a bunch of her friends at like a card game or something. And they said what they were talking about the action. And instead of saying, oh, what a bunch of losers or whatever, they said, you know what? I think those kids are standing up for something pretty important. They got a lot of backbone to do that. And that's when the lights started to go on, that just when they thought they had gone too far, just when they thought they had lost the public, what they'd actually done is gained notoriety, made an inroads, made an impact, gotten attention, and gotten respect for what they were doing. I mean, so anyway, I just love that action. I think it was amazing and
Can I,
gutsy. Yeah.
so what I want to say about that, I know that action, it's beautiful,
Mhm.
is that first of all, if you want to touch a nerve, you have to touch a nerve. Otherwise, especially in today's media environment, no one even heard that you did anything.
Right.
And so when people say to me, oh, but protest is performative, I'm like, you better fucking believe it's performative, and it better be a giant performance. There better be music, there better be dancing, there better be something to look at. Because, let's give them something to talk about. If you want to be on the news, you have to make news.
Right.
Otherwise, what you're doing and saying didn't get looked at in the first place. When we were in the final throes of the fight to overturn the ban on abortion in Argentina, I generally counsel people in a messaging strategy that is engage the base, persuade the middle, marginalize the opposition. They had an engage the base strategy. It was these green handkerchiefs, the handkerchief being a very important symbol in Argentina because it had been the white handkerchief, the symbol during the dictatorship of the mothers and grandmothers protesting the disappeared loved ones. And so they borrowed that and they made it green. Symbology, massive. You have to show, not tell, that you are the dominant belief structure. This is what that odious red MAGA hat does for them. It instantly signals to people in the view that's what silence equals death. That's what love is love. That's what having a pin, that's what having a rainbow does. It creates social proof. And so that was the message. The message for the conflicted was, believe it or not, salvemos miles de vidas. We will save thousands of lives in an arena in which the opposition had long clung to this pro-life message, also in Argentina, not just within the United States. They claimed life. They said passing abortion means we will save thousands of lives. But with the opposition, in the first round of voting, they won the lower chamber and they lost in the upper chamber, which is the Senate. So they made these bright green hangers, neon green hangers, and they hung them from the trees in the area around Congress. And they hung the name of every senator that voted no.
Wow.
And they called them out and they said, Senator Hanger voted, your Senator Hanger, your Senator Hanger. And then in the next round, they won. So you
That is
have to,
that's super powerful.
yeah. And, so where all this leads, as you said at the top, this is a sort of podcast that is research backed insights and strategies. This is where our view of research and the way that we approach public opinion is so detrimental. And here is why. We have long known, and Way to Win has really been at the forefront of the recognition of the fractured media environment. Like how many think pieces, how many conversations, it's impossible to break a signal through the noise. They have a right-wing echo chamber. We don't have one. Nobody's watching linear TV. Audiences are, like you know that, right? You've heard
Mhm.
that. Everyone's heard that. We recognize that when it comes to distribution. But when we're doing message testing, we message test in a make believe world as if it were actually the case that this 30-second ad or this 80-word paragraph that I read, that in the context of my test, where I am paying you for your attention, you are required to read the thing, you are required to watch the ad, you don't have any other distractions. And you're doing it consciously aware that I'm asking you for your opinion. So you not only are forced to view it and concentrate on it, you know that you're supposed to have an evaluation of it. Nothing about that parallels how people actually receive political information in the world because it doesn't account in the first place for the hardship of getting people to hear it in the first place.
Sure.
So we test over here in this make believe world where we pretend like we can watch people, make people watch our ads. And then we say, oh my goodness, it moved the horse race this much. Or, oh my goodness, this message increased Trump disapproval. Or this message made people hate Elon Musk even more. Or this message, whatever you're testing for. As if that would actually be the impact of it when we can't even get it out, instead of understanding that in order for any message to have any impact, it has to actually be heard. So try to imagine, those ACT UP folks, or try to imagine Alicia Garza when she fired off that impassioned uh, posting. I don't remember if it was on Facebook or what, that became Black Lives Matter. If she'd been like, you know what, before I put this out, I'm going to A/B test and check in whether people like BLM or not. Because in order to actually move the conversation, in order to actually change people's minds, you sometimes have to do things that are grossly unpopular at first. Because it is in the doing of unpopular things that you actually create this rupture where it's like the Emperor's New Clothes story, right? Everyone's scared to be like, but but the dude's naked though,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Right? Like,
right, yeah,
you see that, but you're not saying anything. But I
right.
see that, but I'm not saying anything. Like,
Hmm.
somebody's got to say it. And, just as that protest was pilloried in the New York Times, the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr., like these people, it was grossly unpopular until it became popular.
Yeah, and I tell you, this is one thing that Republicans do well is they
Oh,
take things that are strengths of ours and turn them into negatives. So just like as an example, without getting too far into it, it's just like immigration. A pathway to citizenship is actually tested quite well for years. Majority, solid majorities, depending on the, poll, anywhere from 55 to 65% believe there should be a pathway to citizenship for here people who are here and following the laws and all that stuff, right? So, but you know, the through the right-wing echo chamber, they've taken immigration and made it a complete, and turned it into just the southern border and just drugs coming across and just crime and whatever. And they've turned what actually was a strength, enough of a strength that the 2012 autopsy of Republicans after they got spanked again by 2013 autopsy after they got spanked again by Barack Obama's reelection, right? They were like, well, we've got to make an inroads with immigrants and Latinos, and we've got to find our way to getting somewhere on immigration. And so every time Republicans go after something, I'm starting to realize that is and they'll go after it relentlessly and over again using their echo chamber, right? And then they'll turn it into a negative for Democrats because Democrats are like, not, I mean, they just aren't out there pounding it in the same way over and over again. And before they know it, something that used to be a positive for them becomes a negative, right? And
well, and
it's
used to be, I mean, who was the governor, then president, who created braceros and then granted amnesty? It was Ronald Reagan. So
right.
this idea that there are fixed positions, that people hold fixed positions, and that our job when we're looking at measuring things, which is what I do for a living, is to see where people are at, as if that were just fixed and static, instead of understanding that you need to figure out where people are capable of going and how it is aided by our words, our images, our actions, our repetition, our symbols, what we say, what we wear, what we get other people to say to other people, and to say again, and to say again, and to say again, the courage that we demonstrate. They're capable of believing because we know that people actually change their minds, and it is the job of political campaigns to do just that.
That's right. That's right. So I'm gonna leave this section for a second because I want to get to
Yeah.
some of your focus group stuff because I know you got some new focus group stuff. But before I leave the section, I do want to say for people who have been calling, your representative, your congressional leader, congressional reps, whatever. And I don't think that's all for naught, right? We're not
No.
saying, right? We're not saying, and I will say, if you look at what the House Democrats did, I actually think that they were responsive to the pressure that they got after Donald Trump's, joint session of Congress speech and whatever. Everybody was like, this is not enough. It's not good enough. It's not going to work. And House Democrats held together on that vote against this, against this haywire bill that they're trying to get, this
Oh,
government funding bill. And they only lost one. I mean, all their frontline members voted for it and whatever. And that was Hakeem Jeffries as leader saying, listen, we got to come together on this thing and hold the line.
and
So
that was a sea change. And that sea change and that stepping up absolutely was because of public pressure. I appreciate you bringing this back up. We got to use all the tools, every tool, every tool, every tool.
agree.
And in the best case scenario, what happened with the CR vote, with the MAGA murder budget and the capitulation on the part of too many Senate Democrats, is going to be that moment of rupture in which we are able, this is my hope, to have a campaign that says step up or step aside
That's right.
and create a crowd funded primary fund Schumer is not up for a while, but basically, we are going to primary every single senator that did the wrong thing here and aided and abetted this MAGA murder budget. And for those who say, oh, you want to fight a two-front war, no. What I want is to make people step up and actually be soldiers.
Let me
Because if they won't step up, they have to step aside.
let me ask a question that I just random because you just said Chuck Schumer isn't up for a while. Is there what do you I mean, is there like something in the offing like a draft a new Senate minority leader type
Completely.
campaign
Yes.
that like because that would potentially send a message before
Yeah. I think it's you
before you
will,
have to before you have to wait 6 years for a primary or whatever. I'm just like
yeah.
I was
No,
just thinking like what could be done that isn't like we have to wait for a primary 5 years down the road or whatever.
what could be done is you will not get a dime until you confront MAGA crime.
Hmm.
Step aside.
I see you've thought about this.
I have. I mean, all I do all day long is produce messages. So basically, it would be, I mean, it could take many forms, and so it doesn't have to be this form, but the form that occurs to me is that you amass a fund that will go to Senate candidates in 2026, but only if we get a new minority leader. Otherwise, nothing. You will
Wow.
not get a dime.
Okay. All right. That's some serious stuff right there. All right. So let's get into this focus group. That was a super, I stood for the ride. I sat down for the ride. I celebrated on the ride. I was, we rounded the bend on that cul-de-sac and blew it out, man. That was great. So, all right. So there's a focus group. Tell me, I want to know what you guys test. Like, what was your screen in this focus group? Who were these folks that you did?
Okay. So we're doing focus groups all the time. The most recent two sets that we did, the super recent, which was literally last week, it was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So the night of Trump's State of the Undoing of Our Union speech. And then the two subsequent nights. And a couple weeks ago, we had others. The screenings on the earlier ones were Biden 2020 surge,
Mhm.
2024 non-voters.
Okay. What do you mean
So
by, can I just ask you to define surge voters?
please do. So by surge voters, we mean the folks who basically made it so that Biden won in 2020. These
Okay.
were folks who were first timers and made it so that 2020 was, from the vantage point of participation and how many people voted, historic beyond kind of all imaginings and proportions. So in 2024, 19 million of those Biden 2020 voters stayed home.
Right. And this is something we talk for anybody who's been listening. This is something we've been talking that 19, I'm not going to steal your thunder on the focus group stuff because that's completely new, but the 19 million is something that we've returned to a lot. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So probably not a stretch for you to understand why we want to talk to them. Probably logical to you why we recruited them. I probably don't have to explain like
Let,
where that came from, why
right.
we
Let's well, that's it's good news because I do think that our people, our listeners are picking up what you're laying down right now. So there you go.
Okay, so I want you to know like who are these people? Otherwise, the focus
Absolutely.
groups like they don't make any sense.
Sure.
So that was the first set. The more recent set is that group, but we were slightly more permissive in one way. It was disaffected voters and non-voters, so they probably largely are overlapped with that. But the way that we group them is into three different groups: low activation, medium activation, high activation.
Okay.
So we screen them in a way that we haven't before. Normally, we do ideological screens, we do demographic screens. And we still, so these are 18 to 34-year-olds. So we did younger, mixed race, mixed gender. And the way that we clustered them is according to how willing they are to take direct action and how much direct action they've taken. Because we have shifted theory of change, as I said at the top, away from the way we get out of this disaster is by making the best possible case for Democrats in the midterms. I'm not arguing we have to, we obviously we have to win the midterms. I'm saying right now in the immediate and also in order to win the midterms, it is both and what we need is people demonstrating their disagreement, their refusal, their resistance, and their ridicule of this administration. So, what we're looking at is not so much what is the story we need to tell you to make you think Democrats are magically delicious. We're looking at what is the story we need to tell you to make you understand how unacceptable this present regime is and to make you actually want to do something about it.
Okay. And the
So,
high
that
activation folks are people that you think could be activated in that way? Is that the delineation between low and
Yeah,
high?
so we asked them all sorts of questions about previous kinds of direct action, civic engagement. We asked them about voting as well. So these are both voters and non-voters, but they're grouped by sort of these activation levels. And so
Gotcha.
now into the findings. And as I said, they're
Super. Can
young.
I just say that's super interesting for a focus group.
Yes.
Most people focus group people, and it's either are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? Are you a swing voter? Ideology, party, all that stuff. What kind of voter are you? And so this idea of doing low, high, and at low, medium, and high activation is really interesting to me. So anyway, please go ahead.
And to be clear, there was a screener. There were no hardcore Trump people in the groups. Like we didn't, it was,
Yeah.
left to center
Well,
left. Like
you're not trying to figure out what would activate the Trump
no,
voters.
we're not like what would make you just go to the border and shoot people because you feel like it. Like that wasn't the gig we were trying for.
Right.
No. So they're screened out, just like fully picture of who these people are.
Sure.
So the first conversation, one of the earliest conversations we had with them was blue sky. We're not going to give you the answers. How would you name our present system of government?
Okay. Interesting.
Because one of our hypotheses, and I think it's a pretty well validated one, is that we need people to understand that this is not sort of permutations on like normal and kind of what happens when a new government takes over and the opposing partisan side doesn't like it. We're that's not what's up. What's up is we have exited anything that we sort of understand to be a recognizable politics in the modern era, and we are fully in an authoritarian moment.
Right.
So before we tell them that or anything like it, we ask them, like, if you had to name our current system of government, what would it be? And across the groups, this included low activation, people were in astonishing agreement that it's not a democracy.
Hmm.
The word that many of them used, and I was surprised because I would have said this is too high register a word for people to know, was oligarchy. That was the
That's
volunteered word.
That's interesting because I would have thought that like this is a college plus word that people are throwing around.
Yeah, and that's not who, I mean, obviously there's a mix of people in these things,
Sure.
but by no means are these very high information folks because higher information folks tend to be reliable voters.
Hmm. Right.
So, oligarchy, authoritarianism, autocracy, fascism, basically the conversation was a debate among them of kind of where we are on the spectrum, with some saying there are still some remnants or semblance of democracy, maybe at the local level. There's elements of that. Different ones live in different states because we did these online because we wanted national. So, people were debating even like, well, but I live in Indiana and this, or but I live in Texas, but I live in California. And so there was kind of disagreement about the relative level of but people using these terms with much greater facility than I would have guessed. Also, we find in our quantitative research, when we've been asking folks about, are we in a democracy? Are we in an autocracy? Actually, much, much higher than you would guess. Data for Progress recently did polling where they asked people, they gave people a bunch of definitions of oligarchy, and 56% of them picked the right one. Like they correctly defined it,
Wow.
and thought that that was an apt characterization. We
Okay.
also experimented, again in the vein of the conversation that we were just having. We can't limit ourselves to the existing vocabulary. Just in the way the right wing, as you lift it up, they take a term like critical race theory, which, to be clear, has a meaning, right? It
Hmm.
is an academic understanding that comes from the legal discipline around sort of the like deep, deep inculcation within our legal system of racist and sexist practices. But they take the term critical race theory. They do a bunch of focus groups. People in those focus groups, I know because we were doing groups at the same time, they're like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is. So they're like, awesome. People don't know what it is. It's an empty vessel. We will populate it with meaning. We will make it mean the thing that we need it to mean.
Right.
Similarly, like you said, with immigration, to the point where I realize I'm saying multiple things at once. The word deportation, they have performed a similar linguistic magic trick where now, to many of our respondents, deportation means the removal of people who've committed a crime,
That's wild to me.
packed into the semantic frame when, of course, that's not the dictionary definition, but you can see how they perform that magic trick because they keep making a mental
Uh,
association between deport crime, deport crime, deport crime until eventually it just like
It fuses.
it fuses such that, if in your household, every time you make your kid a peanut butter sandwich, you put jelly in it, you can tell them, I'm making you a peanut butter sandwich, and the expectation is that it'll have jelly.
Right.
So when you contrast that with a word like abduction, which is what we have been suggesting,
Hmm.
deportation is a very sanguine word.
Hmm.
And it doesn't mean what we require it to mean. Abduction, which we were able to do in the Mahmoud Khalil case, if you
Hmm.
notice the dominant narrative around that case, I'm talking about
Yep.
the former graduate student who was
At
abducted.
Columbia University. Right. Yes.
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 Abduction's a different word than deportation. So
Sure.
going back to the focus groups,
Interesting.
so the first sort of overall thing, how much more sophisticated a political vocabulary people had than I would have guessed, how much they very much are sort of thinking through like how much authoritarianism we've got. We tested out new terms, as I started to say, um, and they're going to sound goofy to you. You ready?
Yeah, I'm
Because
ready
they're new
for him. Hit
terms.
me. Hit me. I'm taking
So
notes. I'm taking notes.
we tested Trumpocracy. We tested Trumparchy.
Mm-hmm.
The responses to those, which are very useful to us, were no, we can't use a term that's just Trump centric because Trump is a symptom. He is not actually even calling the shots, and he's certainly not how we got here. We got here because of the billionaires. We got here because of the fundamental corruption of our political system. So, whatever is going on here extends beyond Trump. We tested out the term broligarchy, and their initial response to it was like, that sounds silly, that sounds, like too not weighty enough for the moment. But interestingly, by the time we were done with the 2 hours, when we asked the final question, what from tonight really sticks out to you? Almost everyone was like, I'm haunted by the word broligarchy. I think that that's, what is going on. I hate that word. It embarrasses me. It embarrasses me to think about living in a country where that's the case. So the reason that they disliked
And
it,
people
which
understood. Did you have to explain what broligarchy, or did they just
we
inherently get it?
didn't offer them a definition. We said, some people have said this is a broligarchy. What does that mean? And they said, I guess that means where a bunch of rich, this is how they defined it, a
Mhm.
bunch of rich dudes who hate women, who work in tech, are in charge of everything.
It's not far off.
I mean, that is what
Wait,
we in.
that's look. Hey, let's call up Webster and get it down, because right?
So the point of this is not that I'm like making a definitive claim that we call this a oligarchy. The point of it, hopefully, and then I'll get to other findings, is that we're trying to do research in a way that actually matches the task before us and the way that information is received, which is to understand that you actually have to offer up new vocabulary in order, again, to create that rupture where people are like, oh, something else happened. And when we test things, when a term is new, because it's the opposite of familiarity bias has people give higher approval to messages that they've heard before because what we know is that messages that are more familiar are rated as more credible and more desirable because they create cognitive ease.
Mhm.
Things you've never heard of before, by definition, it's like that just sounds weird. That just sounds goofy. That just sounds nuts. When we see that by the end of the groups, that's what stuck out to people,
That's wild.
that's an indicator. Even if they initially were like, I don't like that. Because the job of a message is not to run for homecoming queen. It is not to be popular. It is to shape people's understanding and to ensure that they sort of internalize and can remember and repeat what it is we require. Next
That's
finding.
can we'll go back to findings in 2 seconds. I just say we bandied about, broligarchy in Slack. And I remember saying when it first came up, because it, first came up feels like 2 years ago now, but it was like, I don't know, 2.5 months ago or something. I can't remember. It may have been longer, but it wasn't that long ago. And I remember saying, I think it's too niche. I was like, get back to me next week. I might like it by next week. But it's like amazing to me that this is what stuck with them and haunted them. Haunted is a important, I don't know if that's exactly what they said, but like
No,
just your, yeah.
literally what they said. They're like, I'm gonna be like having to think about that in a
Mm,
way that they didn't like because what they're saying is, I hate that idea.
mhm.
And I hate the idea that that feels applicable
Was
to,
it all women who said that? Or would it be, or there were some men
no,
too who were like,
no,
this
no,
is just
these,
bad news?
this is bad news. And it embarrasses me. And it embarrasses me that I think that it's true.
Mm, wow. That's wild. Okay, let's go.
So,
We have, I would say roughly 10 minutes. I'm sure
okay.
people are like, I'm fascinated by the conversation, so I could go on much longer, but I'm trying to keep it in. So let's get into some of the takeaway. These were good takeaways, but some of the results are,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. So the next thing I would say, like very clearly, we have had, I think many people have had, I won't say we, I'll say people, this kind of default assumption that non-voter means non-activist, that there's a ladder of engagement and that the first rung is voting. And if you don't vote, you're definitely not protesting and you're not boycotting and you're not going to paint the side of your barn and you're not going to wear, the symbology and you're not going to whatever, like make up a dance video for my immigrants are awesome 10,000 food truck caravan to the mall where we were going to have a Bangara salsa samba dance party. I say this on every interview because as God is my witness, this is going to happen.
Okay. All right.
So there are two ladders of engagement. There is an electoral ladder of engagement in which it is the case that voting is the bottom rung. And if people aren't voting, they're probably not going to donate. They're probably not going to door knock. They're probably not going to GOTV. They're not going to sort of go up the chain in the electoral actions. That has, it turns out, nothing to do with the activation ladder of engagement.
Hmm.
And in fact, interestingly, social science research shows that the more people are angry about the electoral system and what it is able to deliver, meaning precisely this 19 million, that are not sort of habitual, I've never voted, I'm not even registered, I have nothing to do with it. There are people who have voted, like they have put themselves into the system at least once, if not more than once, and they opted not to in 2024. Those people who are pissed off that they feel that the electoral lane is not driving them anywhere, they're actually arguably our best targets for the 50-51 protests, the indivisible, the move on, the strike, the boycott, because they actually do want change. They actually do want justice. They actually do want shared prosperity. They actually do want a country where we treat each other decently. And they have looked around and said, you don't get that by voting for Democrats. That's not a pathway to the outcome that I desire. We can yell and scream at them, whatever, or we can recognize that we need to give them a different pathway. And so that's the next thing that I would say that is very, very clear. The next thing that I would say beyond that is
Wait, I just want to make a point here.
please.
Are you saying you can't just shame them into voting? Because
I
there
mean,
does seem to be a whole strategist class that is like, if we just shame our voters, they will turn out for us. And you're trying to tell me, Anat, that that is not an effective activation tool in terms of voting.
I truly wonder whether these will just yell and shame people into voting, have children. I'm like, have you ever interacted with a human? Like a human in any capacity, like for any reason, for any kind of conversation, like forget voting. I'm like, on what planet has that ever yielded a result in any domain? Like, it's not going to. And
Yeah.
so, um, and the interesting thing about going the route of direct action activation is that actually you probably get voting off the back of that. And in fact, what a lot of the scholarship about the 2020 Black Lives Matter surge shows is that that surge, though that protest movement, which was huge in the summer of 2020, as you recall, that's actually a big part of the reason why there was a voting surge.
Hmm.
People go from marching in the streets into the voting booths. It's not the other way around. And so the idea that it's like a zero sum, or you do one and the other, I just firmly believe, and the data support, that you directly activate people into acting collectively, having that collective action yield a result, and that breeds the desire to do it again and the possibility, pardon me, to get them to do it through this electoral channel. So that's the
Right.
next thing I would say.
Hmm.
Then maybe the last thing I will say, and here I have been a broken record saying this, and it's been, I guess, good to see more people taking it up recently. Punditlandia has for years, not just in the context of this election, but many elections. You know, Mark Lillo, who penned the op-ed that like coined a genre of what was then called identity politics. And previous to that, it was called political correctness. And then it was called popularism and all permutations of the notion that like all Democrats need to do is like be more moderate. And the reason people are pissed off with them is because, you know, they had pronouns like that,
Right.
that whole story, or they
Yeah.
gave a shit about immigrants as if they actually did.
Latinx lost the election.
Yeah,
That's it.
Latinx, which like nobody even tried using, is like what happened, right? So the pundits would tell us that voters are judging people on an axis of woke to moderate.
Hmm. Mm-mm.
Absurd. Not true.
Let's just let's just call
Demo-
it for what it is. Absurd. Okay, go ahead.
Democrats are being judged on an axis, and that axis is fight to not fight. And there has been a conflation of moderate to woke with fight to no fight. And it's actually the latter that people care about. And so one of the things that we did in the 19 million, the 2024 drop off, and we do this exercise often. We ask people if you had to liken Democrats to an animal, what animal would it be? And we've done this for years.
Yeah.
Normally, we get one answer. It is always a slug, a sloth, a turtle, or a tortoise. It is an animal that moves slowly. And in the most recent groups, we got different animals. And I was like, what
Interesting.
is this? Just new animals.
Yes.
We got ourselves new
We're gonna have
animals.
a zoo pretty soon. This is amazing.
I was like, fascinating. So post-election, we still got turtle, we still got tortoise. Like, we didn't get none of that. We just got new things too. First new thing we got, they're like a deer in the headlights. The
Mm.
car is coming down the road and they can see it and they don't even get out of the way.
Oh,
We
okay.
got that,
All
which
right.
I would argue is actually worse than a turtle. A
Oh,
tortoise is
I agree. Frozen and actionless.
yeah,
Yeah.
like at least the turtle was like trying to go somewhere, like
Right, I was gonna
wasn't
say the turtle is still directional. It's just moving at a slow pace.
right.
But the
It's not
deer,
like
that thing is dead, dead on arrival, right? It's on the tracks, it's in the headlights, it's the train's barreling down on it, and it's just like, yeah, I guess I'll just take it.
and the irony of all of this consternation and hand-wringing about young men, we're losing young men are, flocking to the right and like getting sucked in by the Jordan Peterson algorithm of it all, which is true, it's happening. The unwillingness to fight,
Yeah.
it impacts everybody, but
Hmm.
like you want to lose yourself, young men, congratulations.
Yeah, right.
Congratulations. And that, and so I guess my summary statement about the focus groups is that people really are like, I want to be involved. I want to be engaged. I want to be making a difference. I don't understand how. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I feel like am I exaggerating? Am I like, to me, this seems like really, really bad, but no one's acting like it's really, really bad. So am I misreading? It's just people in an extended meditation of being like, am I the only one? And telling us again, well, I live in Indiana and I thought I was the only one. Like people around me aren't talking about how bad this is. So I thought I was the only one who thought how bad it was, to the point where we were joking by the end of the groups that our new funding model is that we're going to make people pay us to be in these focus groups and we will not pay them, because they all ended, even the low activation group, with people saying, this was the best 2 hours that I have had since the election. I feel so much better just talking to other people, which brings us back to the point about social proof. Humans are social creatures. We are reading our environment for an understanding of what do people like me think. And when no one is acting and no one is talking and Democrats are not voting in the ways that indicate that this is a 25 alarm fire, people can't tell what they're supposed to think. And so it's on us to reconsider who we consider to be our base. They don't need to be voters to be activated. They really don't. People are hungering for something to do. They want to stand up to this, and they don't believe the pathway is through electoral, at least not right now.
This is really fascinating. So I'm going to make a couple of points. Um, I let you just go because I was so interested in the whole conversation for real. And you know, I interviewed for the better part of 3 decades, so I know how to interrupt people if I think I need to rescue conversation. And so this has been I've done 2 solo interviews on this pod now, and one was Leah Greenberg of Indivisible, and you're the second one, and both have been great. So I'm gonna start lobbying for more one-on-one interviews. But anyway, I will say this: the sense of belonging, right? The sense of people spending 2 hours in a focus group and being like, like this is great. I feel community. I feel like I belong here. I feel like other people are thinking what I'm thinking, which is this is a disaster, right? So I think like this is why we keep encouraging people, all of our listeners, to make sure that you connect locally. Make sure that you're connecting with people face to face. I don't care what kind of local group you join. I want you to be around people and feel, and talk to them. You don't have to talk politics, whatever. You never know they're going to turn you on to. You might be phone baking before you know it. Maybe you're just joining a knitting group, but you need to be engaged locally and hear what other people are thinking about what's going on so that you feel connected and not isolated, because isolation is how we go down that rabbit hole and end up thinking that some dude on Twitter is like sending signals about what's going to happen on Earth for the next 200 years or whatever. Q. So, okay, so no isolation. Isolation bad. Belonging good. Connect locally. Um, Also, what I take away from this is that Democrats, everything they should do, it might not matter as much all of the specific messages they're doing, just as long as everything they do, they act like what's happening is a five-alarm fire. Like if they just like instead of gaming out, well, what are the politics of a shutdown? You know what I mean? Like this is such an antiquated in this moment thought of, well, will Republicans bear the burden of a shutdown in the midterms or will Democrats and whatever? And I guarantee you they had this debate on the Hill. I guarantee they spent a lot of time talking about that, right? It does not matter. You have to signal to people that what is going on is such a five-alarm fire that you had to do something that you would never normally do, right? So that's a thought. So I have other thoughts, but I think I should leave it there. Do you want to just give one last, I don't know, thing, nugget, or are you good?
I guess to end on a note of hope, or at least some hope, which hopefully I've tried to inject throughout. I'm not sure. I can't calibrate anymore how dark, how Princess of Darkness I'm being.
I don't think this was dark. I'm a silver linings optimist and I feel energized by this conversation.
All
So,
right. Well, thank you. We're in what frequent friend and colleague Maya Bordeaux calls a persuasion window. So there are moments where COVID was a perfect example of this. An ad that we had made about universal single payer healthcare tested it in February of 2020, within in-channel testing with all the caveats I gave before, appeared to move people like 2, 3, 4 points. Tested it end of March of 2020, which hopefully is a date that is meaningful to people. What was going on there? Sort of the onset of like, what the fuck? Moved people 15, 18 points. Same ad, didn't change a sentence, a syllable, a visual, same thing. Different things persuade differently in different moments. And right now, we are in a moment of massive sense making in our country where people are trying to figure out what is going on? What is this? Where did it come from? What will it take? And in particular, we have an opportunity, and I really am using the word opportunity. I use words deliberately. Words mean things, and that's my whole job. The opportunity to radically reclaim what government is, because Trump, Musk, MAGA, etc., that's not the government, that's the regime. And it's really important not to call them the government and not the administration. They are neither of those things, they're a regime. The government are the people who tell us if a hurricane is coming and who check on vaccines and create new ones and research them and put them out and do public health and do roads and do, you know, make sure that the food that we're eating is not contaminated and on and on and on and on and on and on. The actual people who make the country run, that's our government. And the right wing, as I know you know very well, has been engaged in an extraordinarily successful multi-decade project to make us hate government, which is how they managed to pull off this hostile takeover. And you don't know what you got till it's gone. Loss
that's right.
aversion is extraordinarily powerful. And I just don't want us to squander this opportunity to say, proud to be public. We have a civil service that serves us. This is our government that they are trying to take from us, and we will not have it. I genuinely believe that in these moments of rupture, in these persuasion windows, we actually could radically remake what people expect and what people demand.
All right. That is a great note to end on. I want to leave it there and say thank you to Anat Shenker-Osorio for joining us today. And thank you, listeners. We appreciate your dedication to the work of rebuilding our democracy. As Anat has just said, there's real opportunity. There's always opportunity, even in really dark, difficult times. This is a real opportunity. So thank you for continuing to engage. Listen to us. Please find us. If this is just you one off because you wanted to listen to Anat and you're like, we've never heard of you guys before, then go to Charting the Way Forward. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, whatever. Wherever you get your podcast, you can find us there. We also have a Substack called Charting the Way Forward, and we'd love to have you follow us there. Leave a review if you hear something great that you love, so that we know that you're digging it. If you don't like it, don't tell us. Just don't tell us. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. If you think you want something different, tell us that too. So, with that, we will see you next Thursday. And until then, do good, be well, hug your loved ones, and tell your dog I say hi.